postmodern ideology loses any objective moral standard, and so it denies universal morality. And what this leads to is moral relativism, and this erodes. Research has shown this erodes a person's ethical foundation and encourages situational ethics. So based on her own testimony, she can do whatever she wants if she feels, in her subjective standpoint, that her course of action is what's best for the moment. This is called situational ethics. And all psychology points to the fact that this will undermine any consistency in your character. You have no idea who you... Well, welcome everybody to the Salty Pastor Podcast. Today, Thanksgiving, its incredible, significant celebration, and how postmodernists are trying to destroy it. Welcome to the Salty Pastor Podcast, where we are here to coach you up in your faith. More importantly, we want you to know what you believe and why you believe it. This is not a podcast strictly for those who are followers of Christ or Christians. It's for anybody who wants to learn how to think for themselves, and they want to build a frame of reference in which to navigate all of the crazy ideologies that are out there in the world today. And so we're glad that you're joining us. One of the best ways to really become a part of the Salty Pastor Podcast ministry is to go to our YouTube channel, The Salty Pastor, and like and subscribe. Like and subscribe, because what that does is two things. Number one, it helps you know when new videos come out, especially if you click on the little bell button. But also, it helps the podcast grow and get a broader audience to people who might be looking for it. Because right now, until we get over 1,000 subscribers, the algorithm doesn't really, acknowledge it or recognize it when people are searching. So, love to get over 1,000 subscribers. We're about almost a third of the way there, maybe not quite a third of the way there. And it takes a little bit of time, but we know that we can do it. So this is a podcast that is completely independent, separated, standalone ministry all by itself. And so we're going to be talking today in our series called Ideologies That Matter. And we're focusing on postmodernism, and what better day to understand the effect of postmodernism that on Thanksgiving. That's right. Today is Thanksgiving celebration. And I just wanted to kind of help people understand why postmodern ideology is so impactful in everyday things, okay? And Thanksgiving celebration is a perfect example of its impact, particularly over the last 30, 40 years. Now, when I was growing up, I went to public school. I went to a public elementary school, public middle school / junior high. I went to a public high school. The first private educational institution I ever went to was when I went to college. And so growing up, I had heard teaching and instruction about Thanksgiving all the time. And here is what I was taught, basically in a nutshell, in that the Pilgrims came to the Americas, and when they got to the Americas, they were ill-prepared, they were dying like flies, and the native Indians saw them struggling and decided to save them. Therefore, the Pilgrims held a feast to say thank you for saving them, and that became the first Thanksgiving. Now, what's being taught today is totally different. Today, it is taught in school that the Pilgrims were colonizers who came to the Americas for one purpose and one purpose only, and that was to subjugate the native Indians and enslave this peaceful, nonviolent tribes that inhabited the area. So, in both of these historical narratives, what you find is complete falsehood. It is so far from the truth of actually what happened. In reality, what happened is that the pilgrims who did come to the Americas came for one purpose and one purpose only, and that was to find and to start a colony where they could worship according to the dictates of their own conscience. They came out of a congregational movement early on in the 1500s that was prosecuted or persecuted in England, and they left as part of a John Brown movement there, and they left and immigrated to kind of the Dutch area there in Amsterdam, and they were there for a little bit of time there in Holland. And what happened is they were really disturbed by the fact that their children were becoming what they considered to be worldly. They were being influenced by the culture around them. So they wanted to go and they wanted to be able to start a colony where they could worship God according to their own desire and drive and perception of their religion. And so in order to do this, they needed sponsors. So they had English and Dutch sponsors who were interested in sending them across. So they go across you heard about the Mayflower and the other ships, and they get there, and it was very difficult. And what happened is the Mayflower Compact that they established was based on this idea of what their sponsors had wanted. And what they did is they basically had everybody was given a share in the general store. And back then, the general store was very similar to the bank. It was like a bank based on goods. And so whatever you produced went into this general store, and everybody had one share. And so you would get an allotment based on the total amount that was in there. So it was a form of collectivism. You could say is very similar to a commune that was started in the 60s and 70s in California and various other places. And today we would call that a form of socialism. And so what happened is William Bradford realized this is not going to work. I mean, very early on, they were starving. There was no productivity. And out of, I believe it was 106 pilgrims, after that first winter, they were down to somewhere in the 40s, like 44 to 45 pilgrims left. So that's a serious amount of people dying. And so what he did is he assigned everybody, each family, their own plot of land, and they were allowed to do with it whatever they wanted. And so they wanted to grow something, they could grow something. They wanted to build shelter, they could build shelter. Another historical fact that's really important to understand is this was on land that was a village that all of the local Indian tribes had abandoned because it had been wiped out by some type of illness. And so they considered it cursed, or it had a kind of a bad, evil spirit about it. And so it was abandoned land that nobody wanted. And that's where they originally started their colony. Now, enter then Squanto. This is very important to understand this part of the story, is that Squanto shows up and he could speak English. He taught these pilgrims there at the latter part of this winter, that very first winter when so many died. And then William Bradford realized, boy, what we're doing isn't working, is he taught them how to fish for cod. And so they immediately were able to bring in great bounty of cod, okay? He taught them how to find, catch, and skin beavers. The beaver pelts, very, very, very popular. He then also did something phenomenal in that spring, is he introduced them to corn. And what's really interesting, if you get into the agriculture and how they grew corn back then, what they would do is they'd dig a hole, like a post hole, size of a post hole, and they'd throw an entire ear of corn in there, and then they would watch it grow. He taught them how to use the leftover fish in order to fertilize around the corn when they would plant it. And so then, of course, that fall, they had a massive harvest of corn. Now, it was Squanto's education and his help of the pilgrims, and it was William Bradford's free market capitalism, basically. What it did is that they went from starving to it exploded their productivity. And because it exploded their productivity, they were able to do something, and that is start an economy with the local tribes. And they started trading with the local tribes. And this is where the first Thanksgiving came from. It was a celebration of their productivity. And then they invited these other tribes, and it was to establish trading relationships. And so that is basically why it came about, is that it was a celebration. It was a great feast. These tribes were invited. They brought goods, but it was based on an invitation from the productivity of the pilgrims. And so today, this story is not taught anymore. The actual facts of the case are not taught historically anymore because postmodernists want to change the narrative, because that is what postmodernists do in order to get people to believe what they believe. And they change the narrative of history to create skepticism about the remarkable things people of old had accomplished. And so why are postmoderns so intent on recreating and changing the narrative and changing the perspective and the interpretation of historical events? Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. And what are the effects of changing all these narratives? Does it really matter why you celebrate Thanksgiving? Does it, the fact that there were pilgrims and there were Indians and why it came about, have anything to do with what you're going to eat today on Thanksgiving and what relatives you're going to see and what topics you're going to talk about? Does it really make any difference? Well, I would postulate that in some way it does. And that's because postmodernists are trying to change the narrative because their philosophy creates so many negative effects on human development, human capital, human potential, human character, that they don't want you to evaluate their ideology on the basis of what it produces. They want you to evaluate their philosophy or their ideology on the basis of how you feel about past events. So what I'd like to do is spend the rest of our time together talking about negative effects of postmodern philosophy on you as a person, on your heart, on your mind, on your soul, on your kids, and their character development. These negative effects impact your personal growth. They impact your ethics. And you remember, ethics is really important because I've quoted this before. Carl Jung said, look, if you know what you believe and why you believe it, and then live according to that, meaning your ethics are in what you do each and every day, your ethics are in line with what you believe, and you know why you believe what you believe, then your happiness in life goes through the roof. If you live in contradiction, in other words, your ethics are ill-defined, they're not clear, you don't have a code of honor based on what you believe and why you believe it, then your depression and your unhappiness grows exponentially. That's why it is so important. Now, I want you to understand how these negative effects of postmodern philosophy not only impact your personal growth and your ethics, it also undermines community development in our society and the social contract that we have with one another. So postmodernism is really bad stuff. And I'd like to dig into that right now and show you what I mean. The first thing I want to do is postmodernists claim that a subjective morality, a moral relativistic approach to life will create a more fair, inclusive, accepting society. And their moral relativism is not any different from your objective morality that comes from faith or a Christian worldview. As a matter of fact, I have this young gal, she's an atheist, and she talks about morality and where it comes from. And I'd like you to now listen to what she has to say.
Hey Christians, you are participating in morality just as subjectively as I, an atheist, am. We both have used our subjective judgment to determine what we think is a good standard for what is right, wrong, and everything in between. You've subjectively chosen which version of Christianity and which version of the Bible and which parts of the Bible and which interpretation of those parts of the Bible to follow. The only difference between you and I is that you think when you die, someone is going to tell you if you did a good job or not of trying to figure out which morals they wanted you to follow. And I don't believe that. I believe that we're accountable to each other here and now, where it actually counts.
Now, first and foremost, I want you to notice the premise of her argument. And of course, it starts with subjectivity. What she's saying is that she readily admits, I have subjectively chosen such and such morality. And then what she says is, and so have you. And I find this really interesting because atheism, which is an outgrowth, particularly these modern day atheists, really they're postmodern in nature. And you see this by the notion of, hey, morality is all subjective, truth is subjective, and so forth. And first of all, I think what's so interesting is this skepticism that any objective truth is true. And what they say is, well, you've accepted these things and made these conclusions based purely on your subjective feelings, emotions, or whatever may be the case. That's what she's saying. Well, of course, this is a denial that, well, there are some things that are true and some things that are false. And if you make a decision on truth based on an objective standard, that's not a subjective conclusion. Now, your interaction with an objective truth is subjective in nature, but the notion that you can't understand and perceive an objective truth that lives outside of yourself happens all the time. I mean, we do that. That's the entire basis for all healthcare, science, technology, all this kind of stuff. So she's using a phone that is based on objective truth to communicate that all morality is subjective. I find that somewhat humorous. And then what she does is she says, in her final conclusion, that my subjective morality is better than yours. Okay, so this is an objective judgment that she's trying to make in her subjectivity, which is illogical to me, based on the notion that the impact here and now is what counts. Okay, well then let's evaluate if the impact here and now, because first and foremost, Christians would say, bottom line is the reason we have an objective truth is because the here and now matters a lot, and how we treat people and our morality has a huge impact on the here and now. That's why we seek objective morality and objective truth and follow it, because it's always true and always objective. Your subjective reality is untested, it's untrustworthy, it changes with the wind, and so how in the world could that be good? So let's show what her subjective morality actually does from an objective standpoint. First and foremost, postmodern ideology loses any objective moral standard, and so it denies universal morality. And what this leads to is moral relativism, and this erodes. Research has shown this erodes a person's ethical foundation and encourages situational ethics. So based on her own testimony, she can do whatever she wants if she feels, in her subjective standpoint, that her course of action is what's best for the moment. This is called situational ethics. And all psychology points to the fact that this will undermine any consistency in your character. You have no idea who you are. Research shows that this is played out in the workplace. A study on workplace ethics noted that relativistic beliefs often correlate with higher rates of dishonesty and unethical decision-making in the workplace. Isn't that interesting? Okay. And that came from a study. Let me see. I believe it's Bracken and Thomas, called Beyond Consultation, the Challenge of Working with User Survivor Groups. Okay. Isn't that interesting? So the next thing I think is really important to understand is her philosophy of postmodern ideology and its lack of moral objectivity or moral standard is it creates a resistance to authority. Notice how she said in her video, well, you have to wait until some, fake person says you've done a good job. This is a result, okay, of skepticism towards authority and traditional structures, and it makes it really difficult to develop any type of respect, discipline, or accountability. Notice how she's trying to be charming and witty, but really she's being skeptical and really disrespectful of all of the systems that have allowed her the freedom to do what she's doing. I don't know if you noticed, but she's holding this coffee cup in her hand, and that coffee cup has a serpent around a female hand holding an apple with a bite out of it. So it's like a celebration of the fall, not a statement that maybe the fall wasn't a good thing. Now, what it does is, how in the world can you work or come to any type of communal or societal contract with people who have no respect, discipline, or accountability for their own actions? This is one of the biggest criticisms of employers today about working with people who have a postmodern ideology that they've grown up with, which has been instilled in them in the public educational system as a framework of thinking. Is that they call these people snowflakes. They call these people disrespectful. They lack discipline and follow through. They want zero accountability for their actions. Okay, so I think the other thing that is important to understand is that this has been proven. Teachers and employers often report that students and employees influenced by postmodern ideals reject any type of constructive criticism, and they call it oppressive, hindering their personal growth. You're oppressing me. So they have a victim mentality that when you bring constructive criticism to get their A game better, guess what? You're oppressing them. You're hindering their personal growth. We see this played out all the time. So her ideology and this ideology overall has a huge impact on the world in which you live in your own life if you allow it to affect your children, or even yourself. Another negative impact of postmodernism is it gives a credible cynicism towards any type of virtue. We talked about deconstruction a little bit on Tuesday. We're going to talk about it in depth later on. But the deconstruction of any virtuous tradition like honesty, humility, courage, hard work, those types of things, leads to a belief that these types of virtues or tools are just the control efforts of society rather than traits to be cultivated. In other words, when someone says you need to be more disciplined, you're like, well, you're trying to control me. Well, no, I just think it's a virtue you should cultivate within yourself because your life will be so much happier and filled with joy. You're trying to control me. Don't tell me what to do. I mean, this is how crazy it is. I think that this research has shown that cynicism towards traditional virtues contributes towards a huge apathy of civic duty and altruistic behavior, such as volunteering. I was noticing a trend where incredibly terrible things are happening on the streets of major cities, acts of violence, and people just ignore that they're happening, okay? And they ignore that they're happening because no one gets involved. As a matter of fact, there's a trial in New York City about a service member by the name of Daniel Penny. And what happened is a homeless man came onto a subway train with a knife, threatening to kill people. And so he immobilized the guy because he was threatening everybody and trying to stab him with a knife. And then they showed up, and then eventually he died. And so Alvin Bragg, the district attorney, the prosecutor there, is prosecuting him for manslaughter for saving people's lives. Well, this is how crazy this postmodern ideology has gotten into even our judicial system and is causing an incredible cynicism and an incredible apathy towards any type of civic duty or altruistic behavior. You see this in our politics right now. You have all these people who say, look, the whole point of having an election is that two people issue a vision of what the country should operate as. And we vote, and then what we do is we say, okay, my side won, let's win graciously. My side lost, let's lose graciously. Let's all come together and try to figure out how to make this the best it can be. But today you have people, I was listening to a clip of a psychologist. I don't know if they were from Princeton or Yale, but they were saying that you should not have Thanksgiving dinner with your family members that voted for Trump because this is a violation of your values. And I just thought, wow, what contempt towards the traditional virtues and altruistic behaviors, that we're not supposed to wish hatred or malicious activities. We're not to threaten or cajole when we lose in an election. We're not supposed to do that. We're supposed to uphold the social contract, and as people voted, well, the people spoke, then let's try to come together and be at peace. But our politics are becoming so divided because of postmodern ideology, where when people lose, they want to leave the country, or they want to kill the people who voted against them, or they won't even sit down and have a family dinner with them. That's what postmodern ideology produces every single time. Postmodern ideology is so dangerous on you as an individual person because it creates emotional volatility where, you wish harm on people who voted differently than you did. I was reading a report how FEMA, there's a I don't know what you call it. There shows this controversy that there was a person at FEMA that told their agents during the hurricane victims to pass over houses that had a Trump sign in the front yard. So the hurricane comes through, I believe it's Hurricane Helen, comes through and just wipes out through massive flooding some of these places in North Carolina, kind of northern Florida. And they're told that FEMA, which is a government agency designed to help all Americans, to pass over people who have a different political persuasion than you do. That emotional volatility is so damaging to society. When you emphasize subjective feelings over objective truths, it creates an emotional instability within you. As individuals base their decisions on fleeting emotions rather than steadfast principles, you never know what kind of conclusion they're going to come to. You see this so often in social media. There's some research that social media trends reveal that postmodern values amplify impulsive behaviors and public outbursts, undermining emotional maturity. So postmodern ideology is infected our social media, and social media is magnifying how people are having public outbursts and undermining emotional maturity. We're becoming, because of postmodern ideology, less emotionally mature. That's a fact. The other thing that postmodern ideology will do to you is it robs you of any purpose in life. Without a belief in a greater narrative or some ultimate meaning, individuals struggle to find purpose in life. The postmodern ideology weakens your resilience and your motivation when it steals your purpose in life. It's purpose in life. It's a distinct meaning in life that gives you what? Resiliency. It's what gives you motivation to keep going even during hard times instead of folding like a cheap pup tent from Walmart. Young adults were exposed to a bunch of nihilistic ideas. So what they did is they researched young adults that are exposed through social media, all these nihilistic, self-centered ideas and principles, and they ended up reporting feelings of greater existential despair, and it caused them an inability to make decisions. And it stopped them from making any progress in career or personal development. Isn't that interesting? It stopped them from having any progress in their career and personal development. And then what that does is, because you have no purpose, you end up coming to the conclusion that, well, it's society's fault or it's the economy's fault why I can't get ahead. It undermines any sense of personal responsibility. This is why postmodern ideology is so destructive. Postmodern philosophy ideology attributes actions and constructs to external forces, and it diminishes any personal responsibility for one's choice and behavior. That's what I was just talking about. Well, since I can't get ahead, since I don't have any purpose in life, and I have no resiliency, that's because of the society. It's society's fault. We need to change society. And this steals you from any agency in your own life. You literally become a victim of everything. And that is not a healthy place. It's not good for your mental health, okay? This mindset of not taking responsibility for what you can take responsibility for in your own life is increased instances of what they call victim mentality, where individuals blame all external systems rather than taking ownership of their character flaws. And this was in a study by, I think it was Leah Levin, called Decolonizing Postmodernist Approaches to Mental Health Discourse, okay? And that's really interesting, is that you have to decolonize postmodernist approaches to mental health, because the postmodern approaches to mental health are increasing this sense of personal responsibility. Another reason why postmodern ideology is really, really bad for you is because it completely disconnects you from any type of true and authentic community, okay? This ideology builds skepticism about any collective narrative. And what it does is it discourages people from engaging in communal activities, leading to isolation and reduced collaboration. You know, the best thing that you could do is go to a Thanksgiving dinner with people who disagree with you politically or even religiously, and sit down and learn how to have a fun time, enjoy good food, appreciate one another. That is what it means to be an adult. That's what it means to have community. Community is not uniformity, where you try to find people that think like you, dress like you, look like you, have the exact same values that you do, political perspectives, and everything else. That is not a virtuous lifestyle. What that is that's cookie cutter, uniform, Marxist, clap-trapped silliness. You don't want that in your life. What you want to do is be able to sit down and enjoy the company of people who completely disagree with you on things. That's where our humanity comes from. That's where compassion and tolerance and forgiveness come from. Your capacity to treat another human being with respect, regardless of what they think or believe or what their core values are, is called being a good human. Try and be a good human and reject all of this postmodern ideology silliness. The other thing it does too, I'm running out of time here, is that it totally destroys your work ethic. There's a study out showing that employers have observed younger workers dismissing traditional notions of effort and reward, negatively affecting workplace dynamics and personal ambition, because they reject the idea of a meritocracy. The meritocracy is not, according to postmodern ideology, a valid system. And so therefore it needs to be torn down. It's part of the patriarchy or the hierarchy or whatever kind of archy you think. And so it wants to tear it down and destroy it. And this allows people with the framework of thinking from a postmodern ideology to say that hard work doesn't matter, and that destroys things. You know, I just want to kind of wrap this up by bringing together is that you don't have to be influenced by this ideology in any way, shape, or form. And it's really not that difficult to be free from the insidious influence of postmodern ideology. It's really not that hard. All you have to do is focus on the unchanging truths of God. Now, I'm not saying the cultural Christianity. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about, focus on the very few, and there are very few, unchanging truths about of God, that there is a God and you're not him. That's the first truth. God created the universe and you're a part of it. God loves you, but you're separated from God because you're imperfect. You are unrighteous. You are unholy. And out of love, he sent his son in order for you to be healed of this taint of imperfection and restored to the righteousness of God, which is your true in purpose and intent in life. These are the simple truths of the gospel. And it's not difficult to believe these few truths. And yet they have the power to protect you from the insidious, undermining, malicious, vindictive, postmodern ideology. Now, I am so thankful for this opportunity to talk into these things, and I am even more thankful that there's actually 3 or 4 people out there who want to grow and learn about their faith. And so if you believe in what I'm doing here, love for you to express your gratitude this Thanksgiving by becoming a regular giver. So it's not hard. Just go to our website, click on the donate button. You can also text the word give to 833-562-3051, and you can become a part of the Salty crew. You can also go to our YouTube channel, The Salty Pastor, and you can like and subscribe, as I said at the beginning of this podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, I just pray that this Thanksgiving, you will walk in the gratitude of a simple truth. And that is that Jesus loves you. That means you matter to him. He values you. He wants to heal you, redeem you, reconcile you, and grow you. Take your faith seriously and walk in the fullness of every good thing that he has for you. God bless.